You're listening to Black Parents Aging, where we help you navigate caring for aging loved ones. Every Wednesday, we'll discuss how to help your parents successfully navigate this new season of life. We are going to talk about legal, health, technology, and finances. Here's your host attorneys, Olivia Smith and Nicola Robinson.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Happy New Year. Another episode of Black Parents Aging today. Woohoo! It is your host, Nicola Robinson. Don't laugh at me. Sorry. And my co-host,
Olivia Smith. Happy New Year, everyone.
So we are going to talk about a topic that I personally think is a little heavy. But I think that it goes really well coming off of the holidays and especially coming off of my last episode about hoarding. I think that this kind of goes hand in hand. So today we are talking about loneliness and aging. Yes, y'all. Okay, take a breath because it sounds sad, but it's not sad. It's not meant to be sad. This is more for educational purposes. So, Liv, let's start us off. What do you want to tell them?
Yeah, so when I'm thinking about loneliness and social isolation, because it's both of those kind of things, that's not just for older people. Mm-hmm. Everybody can kind of suffer from that, and especially with COVID and being in your home and having to quarantine and not being able to interact, that is definitely something that probably a large part of the population may be experiencing now. The Centers for Disease Control say older adults are at an increased risk, though, for loneliness and social isolation because they are more likely to face factors such as living alone, the loss of family or friends, chronic illness, and hearing loss. A lot of seniors, and not even just those that live alone, will openly admit to being lonely. So what we have on the agenda today is we're talking about loneliness and social isolation. Now, let me just do a public service announcement because I have a new retainer. So when I say social isolation, that's a mouthful for me right now. So just go easy on me. So the Center for Disease Control and Prevention say that older adults are at increased risk for loneliness and social isolation because they're more likely to face factors such as living alone, the loss of family or friends, chronic illness, and hearing loss. A lot of seniors, and not even those that live alone, will openly admit to being lonely. And let me just put a pin in that because during COVID times, I live alone. And when I was quarantining, like I was feeling like I need some social interaction. I need some contact with people just because I was in my house by myself for long periods of time because we weren't supposed to be going out. And so that is something that not only seniors can experience, but everyone can experience. Nicola, do you have something?
Yeah, I was thinking about the same thing. COVID has really changed what loneliness looks like for everybody. For you and I, we're used to being out in these streets. We're used to handling business and our clients coming in and out of the office all the time. So imagine how hard it was for us when we had to shut down and go into our homes. So for someone who already had minimal contact with the outside world and then COVID, that can totally change the game in terms of how often they see other people or whatever types of interaction they have. And, we use technology. That's how we have these Zoom happy hours.
That's true.
But, for an older adult who may not be as tech savvy as us, they may not be having Zoom wine and social hours. And, I love a charcuterie.
That's true. Yes, you do. Yes, that is a great point.
So talk to us, Liv. Tell us what the definitions are, because I think that loneliness, I think we all kind of have an idea what that is. And then social isolation, I don't know if I necessarily know what the difference is.
That's a good point. Now, let me just go ahead and say we're not counselors, but we just want to make sure everybody is on the same page about what we're talking about and working from the same definition as we talk about these things. So loneliness is the feeling of being alone, regardless of the amount of social contact. So you can be in a room full of people and still feel alone. That is loneliness. Social isolation is a lack of social connections. And sometimes social isolation can lead to loneliness. Sometimes they overlap, but not always. And so sometimes seniors that have meaningful relationships and regular contact with their adult children and grandchildren will still feel lonely. They may be living alone for the first time in their lives or may miss a spouse. And that's a big thing because, you know, for people that are 60 or over, they generally, most of them got married very young. And so a lot of them have literally grown up with a spouse and have been with that person for 30, 40, 50 years. And if they are suffering from the loss of a spouse, that's almost like losing a limb. Like you've been with that person so long. And so that can definitely lead to a feeling of loneliness.
I was thinking about what you said about the feeling of loneliness doesn't mean that you are actually physically alone. I thought about like when I went off to college, for example, I was around a ton of people, new experiences, but I was lonely. I'll be very honest because this was really, you know, a transition from being at home. So it was a change in my environment. And there were times where I'm like, I'm looking around and it's all these people, but these people don't really know me. And so I definitely remember going through that feeling of loneliness in a sea full of people.
Yes.
So I think our audience needs to understand, like, maybe you do check on your parents and you maybe talk to them pretty regularly. Now, you may not live in the same state with them, but you talk to them enough, but that doesn't mean they're not experiencing that feeling of loneliness.
And I also think it's about connection. So it's not necessarily all the time how many people you are around, but are you truly connecting with these people? Do they know you? Can you have conversations with them? So when you call your parents, you don't want to just be like, you know, a quick call and get them off the phone so you can check that off the list, because they may really need that connection with you. And so maybe you should set some time aside to help with loneliness, especially if you have a parent that is living by themselves now.
And I think you need to understand, guys, that loneliness has not only mental consequences, but there are physical consequences. And that's part of why we're having this conversation, because we want you to be on the lookout for it. The AARP has reported over the course of 7 years that lonely adults have a 26% greater risk of non-suicidal death. So just the experience of experiencing loneliness can lead an increase in your parents' death. And we want to make sure that is not an option. We want to make sure that we see the signs, that we are able to address it. I know there's this other study, I think it's 2 other studies that I remember reading about as we were preparing for this episode. One was back in 2015 by the American Psychological Association. And that one said that there is evidence linking perceived social isolation with adverse health consequences. So you're talking about possible depression, poor sleep, impaired executive function, accelerated cognitive decline, and then even poor cardiovascular function. And then you'll see even impairment of immunity as people continue to age. So that's a real eye-opener, because you want to say, I want you to live a long and prosperous life. And so just the idea that this isolation and loneliness could contribute to shortening that's real eye-opening. I think the other study that I saw was a Cassandra, I don't know how to say her name, y'all, Alcaraz. I messed that up. I'm sorry, Cassandra. But she's a public health researcher from the American Cancer Society. And she analyzed some data from more than 580,000 adults and found that social isolation increased the risk of premature death for every race. She found that social isolation increased the risk of premature death for every race. But get this, y'all. Social isolation doubled the risk of early death among African American participants in her study. Something about our need to be connected.
Yes.
as people, as African American people, it is important. It's critical to our health. She said overall, race was a stronger indication of social isolation. It was a bigger indicator than even the sex. So white men and white women were more likely to be the least isolated compared to Black men and Black women. They had a totally different experience.
That is insane.
Right. So check on y'all parents. Please check on y'all parents.
Wow. Yes.
Now that was heavy. So
yes, it was.
But we can't just leave them with that. So let's think about, or let's talk about what can they do, if anything, to kind of help their parents.
So yes, what can we do? We don't want to just give you a problem. Let's work on some solutions. So we always go back to the first episode where we talk about having those conversations. So this is yet another conversation that you can be having with your parent. And one of the things that may be helpful when you have this conversation is a strategy called Name It to Tame It.
You're always giving us a strategy.
I'm all about these strategies and these names. I love a good name. Therapists, doctors use this for their patients and clients, and parents sometimes use this with their kids too when they're trying to help them manage emotions. So we can encourage this with our parents and older loved ones as well. And it goes something like this. How would you describe the way you're feeling? Research shows that there is power in labeling our emotions and fears. And I will be really transparent right now. I've done some work on mindset and some coaching around that. And I will say, when I was asked, how do you feel? I'm so used to just saying good, and that wasn't an option. I and a lot of the other people in the group struggled with that. And we actually had feelings sheets that they gave us. So when they asked us how we felt, sometimes we didn't have the language right at the tip of our tongue to say that. And so we would look at the feeling sheet and they would give us time to go through and find the actual feeling that we were experiencing. And that was an eye opener for me, that sometimes when we ask people how they're feeling, we don't really ask them to know. We ask them so they can say good and we can move along. But when you take a moment to literally check in with yourself and say, wait, how am I feeling? Good is off the table, then you can get a real answer.
That's a great point. Now, I'm not going to say your age, but you're an adult and you didn't know your feelings.
Exactly.
So we also got to think about our parents, because I know my parents did not grow up using a lot of feeling words.
Absolutely.
So when you are checking in with your parents and ask them, how would you describe the way you're feeling? You're going to have to be patient with them.
Yes.
And take good off the table. Like,
yes.
so you can't use that word. And then give them the chance to figure out what exactly it is, because they may not have that vocabulary. I see that now with my kids. I'm like, okay, you crying? What you crying about? Like, describe what you're feeling. And that usually throws my daughter off, because she'd be like, wait. And she's such a diva.
Let me think about this.
She got to come up with sparkly rainbow answers. So yeah, give people the space to figure out what it is that they are feeling. You may be completely surprised at what their answer is.
Yes. And then be open to receiving whatever that answer is. Don't try to talk them out of how they're feeling. People are entitled to feel however it is that they feel.
If you ask your parents describe how you're feeling and they say lonely, you could be like, what you talking about? I talk to you every day. Our kids been over there 5-6 times this week. What you mean you lonely?
That's it.
So give them that space, because just because you may perceive that they don't have no reason to feel lonely, that doesn't mean that's the actual reality of their feelings. And remember that only they can really tell you what they're feeling.
That's spot on. Scientists say that putting a name on emotions bridges the gap. So between your thoughts and your feelings. And that shift, so for example, from saying dad is lonely to dad is feeling lonely, separates them from the feeling. it means that your parent is feeling a certain way, not that they are that entirely. It's a subtle thing, but it's significant when they are talking about how they're feeling. Whether or not you want to talk about loneliness with your parent also depends on your relationship with them. Some people will, try to have that conversation with their parent. And if that is not something that their parent is used to, they may say, I'm fine, or I don't want to talk about that, or, kind of brush you off. And so as we talk about these conversations and these tough conversations to have, you also have to keep in mind, okay, what is my connection and relationship with my parent? And am I the person to have that conversation, or is there someone better suited to have that conversation?
That's a really good point. I know for you and I, we're the oldest in our family. So sometimes we get the information and we feel like we're the one that needs to bring it back to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But they may receive it better.
You're not going to tell me that.
But no, they may receive it better from one of your siblings or someone else. Maybe even just a church member or a neighbor that they've spent a lot of time with, that they had that connection to.
Absolutely.
And be okay with that. Like, you ain't got to be the solver of all problems.
It's not about you.
It's so not about you.
Yeah. I have to remind myself that sometime, but yeah, it's not about you. It's about your parents, making sure, having a real check-in with your parents to see how they're really doing.
So I know a lot of us are probably thinking now, okay, if my parents are lonely, I need to ease that as soon as possible. I got to fix it, because that's, that's our personality.
Let me drop these kids off over there to keep them company.
And we definitely want to make sure we help ease the problem before it starts turning into those physical problems that I mentioned earlier, like the depression, or it could be anxiety, or, start seeing that decline in health. We definitely don't want it to get to that point. Remember, you are not a doctor. Mm-hmm. Hear me again, audience. We're not a doctor. So don't go over there trying to fix stuff, and don't try to diagnose your parents.
Yes.
If someone is struggling, by all means, encourage them to go to their doctor and have a conversation about this with their doctor. There are studies, we love a good study. But there was a study a few years ago that said people in early stages of Alzheimer's might be more apt to feel lonely or socially detached. So with things like Alzheimer's and other dementia, early detection is crucial. So if you can have that conversation with your parents and encourage them to go and see a doctor, that is fantastic, because if there is something else going on, we can find out as soon as we can. So after seeing a doctor, there are other things that seniors can do to kind of help and ease that loneliness. But listen, y'all, there is not a one-size-fits-all solution. I'm going to give you a couple of suggestions, but don't think that all of these are going to work for your particular parents. You really need to know them and know their temperament and know what makes sense for them. So maybe you want to consider something like it's time for them to move. Maybe they need a change of scenery. Might be time for them to say, okay, this house is full with memories, or maybe it's too much for me now. And so moving into some type of senior housing where there's activities that are scheduled. Well, COVID is making things a little bit different right now, but prayerfully when the world opens back up, they could consider senior housing or a senior community where they can get plugged in and start making some new friends and creating some new activities for themselves.
And those senior communities are popping. Like sometimes when you look at their activities, boy, you're like, how old do you have to be to move in here? Because I want a place that already has all this scheduled for me as well.
And let me tell y'all, some of them food, amazing. So Olivia and I work a lot with senior communities. We go to assisted living homes, we go to nursing homes, and they tell us what the food is like. And so we've eaten it.
And because I'm always wondering what the food is like. So absolutely.
And you may want to think about if they're not at that place, if they're not looking to move, maybe a pet. Not a puppy, y'all. Let me be also clear about this. Puppies are small children.
Shout out to my sister who has a puppy. And
Nobody wants a puppy. Nobody wants a puppy.
Yes, that is true. Not a puppy.
So maybe a older, more, docile, already
Yes.
kind of, tame animal would be a great addition to your parents' home. Or maybe if they don't even want the responsibility of having a pet for like a regular member of their family, they can become rescue.
Yes.
Maybe they commit to just keeping some puppies and not puppies, sorry, keeping
Right.
some
What do you
animals,
say? What do you
but
say?
keeping dogs and cats, on a more foster type
Yes.
basis. And
Respite
that way,
care.
yes, exactly,
Yes.
respite. So that way they can just kind of help and, be there for the animal until their forever home becomes available.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. Another one that you may want to think about is volunteering. I know,
Mhm.
again, with COVID, it's kind of odd and how to go about that, but volunteering at churches or like hospital and food banks are an option. I know because of COVID, some of the volunteer activities I used to do are no longer an option. So I had to really seek out some that you could find online. One that I've looked into and I'm trying to get started with is helping first generation kids with their applications for college.
Oh,
And
that's
that's
a
something
great
and
idea.
that's something I can do online. And so if your parents are people who like to read, who can read through the essays, who can maybe give some feedback, that's a perfect activity that could get them connected to that first generation that's trying to get into college. And then they can kind of build a relationship. So that's
That's
another
great.
person that they could add to just the people in their wheelhouse, if you will. Let's see what else. We've talked about technology a lot. So if you haven't, and I encourage you to go back and listen to that episode, but look at some of the technology out there that you may be able to give to your parents to help them
Yes.
be more in contact with other people. And then you may want to look at like, how often do y'all call y'all parents? Let's
Mhm.
just be honest. Maybe you need to call them more often. And maybe you need to talk to your siblings and other family members and say, hey, y'all, let's all commit to
Yes.
calling and checking in and having real conversations
Yes.
with our parents.
But you know what is even better than you calling? It's them grandkids calling.
Oh, girl.
Nicola was saying how her kids call their grandparents every morning, and I love that. I mean, just to start their day off, like, they want to hear from the grandkids what's going on in school. They want to hear all of it.
And so we actually got Alexa, the little home devices. My kids say, Alexa, call Nana. And she be ready to answer that
I know
call.
she does.
That is her whole day. They can talk about recipes. They can talk like she shares what she knows with them, and then she looks for feedback from them. So it gives her that interaction. Because my mother-in-law does live alone, but she got it on her calendar. Her
I love
grandbabies are
it.
calling.
I love
So
it.
thanks to technology, she gets them anytime because they don't need to know the number. My daughter's 6. She don't know the number. But also, listen, with the calling, if you do recruit other family members to get on board and say, yes, I'm going to commit to calling, and you got, 10 different people, make sure all of those people are actually going to be warm. The conversations are
Right.
going to be natural and genuine.
Right.
You know your cousin. And if your cousin is committing to these calls and they're going to be like, what you want? They probably not.
No. No, don't have people calling, picking fights with your parents, asking your parents for money, trying to get them to do things. Like, no, that is not why we want you to call. None of those
So,
things.
listen, if you can't trust that relative to be genuine and to really care and to really, sit on the phone and have a conversation, don't ask them. Just, it's not personal. Just don't ask them. I think at the end of the day, and I say this in pretty much every episode, all that we do is from a place of love.
Yeah.
And so the priority needs to be always making sure your parents feel loved, they feel heard, and they know that you are there for them. And so
Yes.
sometimes cousin Ronnie, he can't be a part of the conversation because you know that he not the one. And that's okay.
We can do something else.
So I think that this is definitely a conversation we could probably keep going on forever and ever, but I think that's a good place to end. We've given y'all some statistics, we've given y'all some studies, and we've also given you some suggestions on some solutions. Oh, you know what? There is a suggestion that I had forgotten about.
Yes, ma'am.
Adopt a grandparent.
Yes.
Remember we saw this a couple of years ago. Look into it wherever you are, guys. But some of the colleges have programs called Adopt a Grandparent.
Yes.
See if that's something that your parents might be interested in, especially if they don't have any grandkids and they're looking to you to find out when they're going to have some. Maybe you can alleviate that pressure.
I have a kid right here for you.
She's a sophomore in college majoring in biology.
Absolutely. That's a great idea.
But yeah, so look into that. That is one that I definitely forgot about. All right. I think that's it. Anything you got to tell the people?
Just that we hope that something we said was helpful. We always love to hear your feedback, comments, questions. Is there something that you want us to talk about that you haven't heard? This is a judgment-free zone, and we are here to listen to the feedback and give the people what they want. Yes. So we would love for you to connect with us on Facebook, on Instagram, SR Law Group, and you can listen to our podcast on our website, which is www.srlawgrp.com.
All right. Until next time.
See you soon.
Thanks for joining us this week on Black Parents Aging. Check out our Facebook group at Black Parents Aging, where we go live to answer your questions. For more info on today's topic, check out the show notes on our website, srlawgrp.com. If you know someone who could benefit from today's episode, please share a link to the show. Subscribe to the show to catch new episodes and leave a review. Until next week.